The Palace of Versailles was a glittering dream on the outside, but a revolting nightmare up close. Here's the truth that no one tells you. If you stood in front of the Palace of Versailles today, you'd probably be amazed. It's stunning. Massive fountains, golden gates, fancy gardens, rooms full of mirrors and marble. Everything screams wealth, power, and glory. But if you could travel back in time to the 1600s, if you walked through the same halls while King Louis XIV was alive, you wouldn't be able to breathe, because Versailles stank. It didn't just smell bad, it was disgusting. The air was filled with the stench of human waste, rotting food, sweaty nobles, wet fur, perfume so strong it burned your nose, and things we're too polite to name. This wasn't just a slight problem, this was one of the dirtiest, smelliest, most unsanitary royal palaces in all of Europe. And today, we're going to uncover the truth about Versailles that history books tend to leave out. The shocking truth about bathing: almost no one did it. Let's start with something that might blow your mind. In the 1600s, people thought bathing in hot water was dangerous. Yes, dangerous. According to historian Jules Harper, many people believed that hot water weakened your body, opened your pores too much, and let in sickness. So instead of relaxing in warm tubs, people just wiped themselves off with cloths or splashed a little water here and there. Even the king, the mighty Louis XIV, known as the Sun King, barely bathed. Historians say that during his entire life, he may have only taken 2 full body baths. Just 2. Now, to be fair, he didn't completely ignore hygiene. He washed his hands every morning. He sometimes wiped himself with alcohol-soaked towels. And he used perfume, lots and lots of perfume. But did he smell good? Probably not. Sitting next to him at dinner would have been a challenge, and this was totally normal. Most nobles didn't bathe. When they got sweaty or dirty, they just changed their clothes. Louis and his courtiers might switch shirts or outfits multiple times a day, not just to freshen up, but to show off their wealth and status. Perfume helped a little, but body odor was a constant issue. And remember, underarm deodorant didn't exist until the 1900s. In today's world, using the bathroom is something you do in private, but in Versailles, that idea didn't exist. King Louis XIV often held important meetings while sitting on the toilet. Yes, he was doing his royal business, while literally doing his business. He wasn't alone. Other nobles did the same. Chamber pots and commodes were common in private rooms. If you were high-ranking, you might be lucky enough to have a tiny closet in your chamber to go in. But most people weren't that lucky. Versailles didn't get its first flush toilet until 1738. When Louis XV had one installed for his own use, so everyone else had to rely on chamber pots and public latrines. The problem? There weren't nearly enough toilets for the number of people living at the palace. Versailles was packed with nobles, servants, visitors, guards, cooks, and more. And the few toilets they had, they constantly overflowed. Sewage would leak through the walls, it seeped through the floors, it dripped into bedrooms, hallways, even kitchens. With toilets full and latrines backed up, people got creative. And by creative, we mean gross. Chamber pots were often dumped straight out the windows. That's right, raw human waste flying through the air. If you were walking in the gardens or down a hallway, you had to be on high alert. It wasn't just bird droppings falling from above. Even Marie Antoinette was said to have been struck by flying waste. If the pots weren't dumped outside, someone had to carry them to a cesspool. These were large pits where the waste was collected, but they were often located right next to the palace. The smell was horrifying. Some people didn't even bother using pots. They just relieved themselves in corners, on staircases, or against the walls. In 1702, Princess Elizabeth Charlotte of the Palatinate was so disgusted that she wrote about it in letters. She said it was impossible to leave her apartment without seeing someone urinating in the hallway. Eventually, King Louis XIV told his servants to clean up the waste once a week. Witnesses described the smell of Versailles in extreme detail. One visitor said the entire palace, including the parks and gardens, smelled so bad that it made people gag. Urine and feces weren't just in the latrines, they were everywhere. The palace courtyards, the elegant corridors, even the Hall of Mirrors were stained and reeking. And just outside, On the Avenue Saint-Cloud, the road was covered in stagnant water, sewage, and dead cats. It was like a horror movie, except this was real life. To fight the awful stench, nobles used perfume, tons of it. Historian Alain Corbin said that perfume wasn't just for beauty, it was a way to protect yourself from the filth in the air, but it backfired. Instead of cleaning the air, it just created a toxic cloud of flowery scents mixed with human waste and rotting garbage. Sex, hypocrisy, and the forest brothels Versailles wasn't just dirty, it was also wild. When Louis XIV moved his court to Versailles, nobles and workers swarmed into the area. The forest nearby became known as a kind of open-air brothel. Sex workers offered their services there regularly. Louis XIV claimed to hate this behavior. He punished sex workers and called them sinners. But behind closed doors, he had many mistresses. Some were well known, and some were hidden. This kind of double standard was common in the royal court: public virtue, private vice. By the time he died, Louis XIV was completely toothless, but he wasn't the only one. In the 1600s and 1700s, sugar became popular among the rich. Fancy treats were everywhere, but so were cavities, infections, and rotting gums. People still cared about appearances, though. In a guidebook called The School of Venus, it was said that a beautiful woman should have even and very white teeth. So nobles used powders and mouth rinses to fake a healthy mouth. But inside, their teeth were often a disaster. And it wasn't just their mouths that suffered. The lack of hygiene in food preparation meant that many people at Versailles had intestinal parasites. Even the king. Louis XIV suffered from tapeworms multiple times. One time he passed a worm that was nearly 6 inches long. One of the most famous parts of Versailles fashion was the powdered wig. Why did everyone wear them? Partly to show off wealth, but also to cover up baldness and avoid lice. The wigs acted as a trap. Lice would infest the wig instead of the person's actual hair. Wigs could be boiled. Lice-infested hair. Not so easy to clean. So many noblemen shaved their heads completely, then wore wigs. Women usually didn't shave, but they wore their own elaborate hairstyles and wigs too. Even the kitchens weren't safe from the palace's plumbing problems. On at least one occasion, sewage flooded Marie Antoinette's private kitchen. The food was spoiled. Everything had to be thrown away. Even when things seemed normal, hygiene in the kitchen was poor. Parasites and foodborne illness were common. No surprise, there was no running water, no food safety rules, and way too many people. Built on swampy ground, with nowhere for the waste to go. Why would anyone build a royal court in such a terrible location? Versailles was originally just a hunting lodge. It wasn't near flowing water that could carry waste away. In fact, it was built on shifting sand and marshland, a terrible spot for building a clean, functioning palace. But Louis XIV wanted to show his power. He wanted a symbol of control, wealth, and glory. So he stayed in Versailles permanently, unlike previous kings, who moved between palaces. That decision led to disaster. Thousands of people packed into one palace. No plumbing, no sanitation system, no escape. Cat people would have loved Versailles, but no one else would. With all the leftover food and filth, rats were everywhere, so naturally so were cats. Versailles was full of cats, both pets and feral hunters. They helped control rodents, but they added to the mess. Their droppings were everywhere, their dead bodies littered the streets. The stink just kept getting worse. Here's a strange twist. Some of the colours we know today came from Versailles. In 1775, Marie Antoinette wore a dress in a strange purplish-brown colour. Her husband joked that it looked like a flea, une puce. The colour became known as puce, and every woman at court wanted a gown in some version of it. Old flea, young flea, belly of the flea, and so on. Then, when their baby was born in 1781, they took it even further. The court invented a new colour, caca dauphin, literally, crown prince poop. It was a light brown colour, inspired by the royal baby's dirty diapers. Yes, really. Finally, a bit of cleanup, but only a bit. When Louis XIV died in 1715, His great-grandson became King Louis at just 5 years old. As he grew older, he realized Versailles was in terrible shape. One of his first big projects was to extend the sewage pipes so that the cesspools weren't right next to the palace. It didn't solve everything, but it helped. So now that you know the dirty truth, would you have wanted to live at Versailles? Let us know in the comments. And if you thought this was shocking, check out more videos, because behind every glittering crown, there's usually a pile of poop hiding somewhere nearby.